John Miller wiped sweat from his forehead and looked across his 20 acres of farmland. The Nebraska sun beat down on him as he kicked at the dry soil with his worn boot. 2 years had passed since his wife Mary died, and each day seemed harder than the last. The farm that once thrived under their care now barely produced enough to keep him and his daughter Abby fed. He walked back to the old farmhouse, its white paint peeling from years of harsh weather. Inside, Abby sat at the kitchen table surrounded by college brochures. She looked up when he entered, her face bright with hope despite their circumstances. "Dad, the University of Nebraska offered me a partial scholarship," she said, pushing a letter toward him. "I could start this fall." John forced a smile. He was proud of his daughter, but her leaving would mean facing the empty house alone. "That's wonderful, honey. Your mom would be so proud." Abby's smile faded slightly. "But what about the farm? And you? Who will help with the harvest?" John shook his head. "Don't you worry about that. I'll figure something out." Later that evening, after Abby went to bed, John sat on the porch steps and stared at the stars. Mary used to say that stars were windows to heaven. He wondered if she was watching him struggle. The truth was, he had no idea how to keep the farm going. The tractor had broken down last week, and the repair costs were more than he could afford. The next morning, John drove into town to pick up supplies. At the general store, he overheard Bill Peterson and Frank Jones talking about a special livestock auction happening at the county fairgrounds that weekend. "They say they've got some exotic stock coming in," Bill said. "Stuff that can work twice as hard as regular animals." John paused. He hadn't considered buying a horse, but without the tractor it might be his only option. Horses were expensive to feed and care for, but at least they didn't need spare parts or fuel. He grabbed a copy of the local newspaper on his way out and found the auction advertisement on page 3. The ad was unusual, with official-looking, government seals at the bottom and fine print he couldn't quite make out. But the important part was clear. Livestock auction, Saturday at noon, all sales final. When Saturday came, John counted out his savings on the kitchen table. $342. It wasn't much, but maybe enough for an older horse. He put on his one good shirt and his least worn pair of jeans. "Where are you going?" Abby asked, coming into the kitchen. "You look nice. Thought I'd check out that auction at the fairgrounds," he said. "We need something to help with the field work since the tractor died." Abby looked worried. "We can't afford a new tractor." "Not a tractor. Maybe a horse." "A horse?" Abby laughed. "Dad, you don't know anything about horses." John shrugged. "I can learn." The county fairgrounds looked different than usual. Military-style vehicles were parked around the perimeter, and men in dark suits stood at each entrance. John felt underdressed and out of place as he approached. A woman at a folding table stopped him. "Sir, I need you to sign these before entering." She pushed several forms toward him. "What's all this?" John asked, picking up the first paper. "Standard, non-disclosure agreements," she replied without looking up. "Government regulations for this type of auction." John frowned. Since when did horse auctions require government paperwork? But he needed help with the farm, so he signed where indicated. Inside the main building, John was surprised by the sophisticated setup. The usual folding chairs had been replaced with numbered seats, and a high-tech stage stood where carnival games normally would be. The room was filling with a mix of farmers like himself and people who looked like they belonged in Washington, D.C. He took a seat in the back row and waited. At exactly noon, the lights dimmed and a man in a crisp suit stepped onto the stage. "Gentlemen and ladies, welcome to this special government-sanctioned auction," the man announced. "What you will see today is classified. What you will bid on today is extraordinary, and what you take home today could change your life and perhaps the world." John shifted uncomfortably. This was starting to sound like more than he had bargained for. He considered leaving, but then thought of Abby's college dreams and the failing farm. The first items up for auction were strange metal devices that the auctioneer claimed could analyze soil composition and predict weather patterns with perfect accuracy. They sold for thousands of dollars to eager buyers in the front rows. "Next up, lot number 42, the auctioneer called. Two men escorted a woman onto the stage. John sat up straight, confused. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with long, brown hair and a slim build. Her skin had an unusual pale blue tint that John assumed was a trick of the lighting. She wore a simple gray jumpsuit with a number printed on the chest. Agricultural specialist, the auctioneer announced. Suitable for farm work, exceptional knowledge of crop cultivation, weather prediction, and soil management. Starting bid, $500. The room remained silent. John looked around waiting for someone to bid, but no hands went up. The woman on stage kept her eyes down, her hands folded in front of her. With a shock, John realized she was pregnant. Her jumpsuit stretched slightly over a small but visible bump. "Come now," the auctioneer said, sounding annoyed. "She's worth 10 times that. $500 for expertise that will triple your crop yield." Still, no one bid. John didn't understand what was happening, but something in him couldn't bear to see the woman standing there, being treated like livestock. Without fully thinking it through, he raised his hand. "We have 300, the auctioneer said, though John hadn't spoken an amount. "Sir, I only have $342, John called out. The auctioneer looked to a man in a dark suit standing at the side of the stage, who gave a slight nod. "Sold for $342 to the gentleman in the back," the auctioneer announced, sounding relieved. A moment later, a young man in uniform approached John. "Please follow me to complete the paperwork, sir." John followed, his heart pounding. What had he done? He couldn't afford to hire help, and he certainly hadn't come here to what, by a person that couldn't be legal. Yet here he was, being led to a small office to complete the transaction. As he walked, he caught a glimpse of the woman being led through a side door. Their eyes met briefly. Hers were a startling deep blue, and filled with something that might have been hope or fear, or both. John Miller had come to buy a horse. Instead, he was about to walk away with someone, entirely different. John sat in a small office at the back of the fairgrounds building, staring at the stack of papers a stern man in a black suit had placed before him. The forms had words like classified and extraterrestrial stamped across the top. His hands shook as he tried to make sense of what was happening. "Mr. Miller," the man said, "I'm Agent Clark with the Bureau of Interstellar Affairs. What you're about to learn is known to less than 1% of the world's population." John looked up from the papers. "I don't understand. I came to buy a horse." Agent Clark smiled thinly. "Yes, that's what the advertisement suggested. It was designed to attract farmers who might be willing to provide sanctuary for our visitors without drawing attention." "Visitors," John repeated. 6 months ago, an escape pod crashed in Wyoming. Inside were 12 refugees from a planet called Cerulean. They're fleeing a war that has destroyed much of their civilization. Agent Clark pushed the papers toward John. "The woman you just purchased, her name is Elizabeth, is one of those refugees." John stood up suddenly. "I didn't purchase anyone. That's not legal. That's not right." "Please sit down, Mr. Miller," Agent Clark said calmly. "This isn't slavery. It's a placement program. Elizabeth volunteered for this. The money you paid goes into a trust for her future needs." John sat slowly, his mind racing. "She looks human." Ceruleans are remarkably similar to humans. Their main differences are internal. Different organ arrangement, more efficient respiratory system, and their blood contains copper instead of iron, which gives their skin that blue tint. "And she's pregnant," John said. Agent Clark nodded. "Yes, the father was killed during their escape. The child will be born in about 3 months. We've confirmed through scans that the baby will appear mostly human, with minimal blue coloration that can be hidden easily." John rubbed his face with his hands. "Why me? Why did you accept my bid when it was below your asking price?" "We've been watching you, Mr. Miller. Single father, struggling farm, good community standing, no criminal record. And Elizabeth specifically requested a rural placement. She was an agricultural scientist on her world." Agent Clark leaned forward. "Also, no one else bid. We can't keep these refugees in government facilities forever." John thought of his empty farmhouse, his failing crops, and Abby leaving for college. Part of him wanted to walk away from this whole strange situation. But another part, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be alone and afraid after Mary died, couldn't bear the thought of abandoning someone who needed help. "What happens if I sign?" John asked. "Elizabeth comes home with you today. You provide her with shelter and protection. She helps on your farm. The government provides a monthly stipend to cover her expenses. It's all outlined on page 4. When the baby is born, both will be given provisional citizenship under your sponsorship." John read through the papers carefully. The terms seemed fair, even generous. The monthly stipend was more than enough to cover extra food and supplies. There was a medical contact number for emergencies, and there was an escape clause. If either party wanted to end the arrangement, the government would relocate Elizabeth within 24 hours. He signed the last page and pushed the stack back to Agent Clark. "Congratulations, Mr. Miller. You're now part of a very select group of Americans participating in humanity's first alien refugee program." 20 minutes later, John stood in the parking lot beside his old pickup truck. Elizabeth stood nearby, now dressed in regular clothes, jeans and a long-sleeved blue blouse that almost matched the faint color of her skin. She carried a small bag that presumably contained all her possessions. "Do you need help getting in?" John asked awkwardly, gesturing to the passenger door and then to her slightly swollen belly. Elizabeth shook her head. "I am capable," she said, in perfect English, though with an accent John couldn't place. She climbed into the truck with ease. The drive home was silent for the first 10 miles. John kept glancing at her, still trying to process the idea that he was driving an alien pregnant woman to his farm. Elizabeth stared out the window, watching the Nebraska landscape with intense interest. Finally, John cleared his throat. "So you're from another planet?" Elizabeth turned to him. "Yes, Cerulean. It orbits a star you call HD 4307. It's 42 light-years from Earth." "And you can help with farming?" he asked. "I was a botanical geneticist and agricultural systems designer," she said. "I developed food production methods for harsh environments." She paused. "Your farm is struggling, yes? I can help make it productive again." "How do you know my farm is struggling?" "They showed me pictures, soil analysis, weather patterns for your region." She looked down at her hands. "I chose your file from several options. I thought I could be useful there." John was surprised. "You chose me?" Elizabeth nodded. "A farm is a good place to raise a child. Open spaces, fresh air, away from too many curious eyes." She placed a protective hand on her stomach. "My baby will look mostly human, but may have some differences. I need somewhere safe." They fell silent again as John turned onto the dirt road leading to his property. As they approached the farmhouse, he felt suddenly embarrassed by its run-down appearance, the peeling paint, the sagging porch, the overgrown yard. "It's not much," he said apologetically. "It's perfect," Elizabeth replied softly. Abby was sitting on the porch steps when they pulled up. She stood, her expression changing from curiosity to shock as Elizabeth stepped out of the truck. "Dad?" she called, walking toward them. "Who's this?" John took a deep breath. He hadn't thought about how to explain Elizabeth to his daughter. "Abby, this is Elizabeth. She's going to be staying with us, helping with the farm." He hesitated. "She's, got some special knowledge about farming techniques." Abby looked from her father to Elizabeth, her eyes widening as she noticed the woman's slightly blue-tinged skin and pregnant belly. "Hello, Abby," Elizabeth said with a small smile. "Your father has been kind enough to offer me sanctuary. I hope my presence won't be disruptive to your home." "Sanctuary?" Abby repeated, looking questioningly at her father. John sighed. "It's a long story, honey. Let's all go inside, and I'll try to explain what happened at the auction today." He picked up Elizabeth's small bag. "I came looking for a horse and ended up with something a whole lot more complicated." As they walked toward the house, Elizabeth stopped suddenly and pointed to a withered cornfield. "Your soil has a severe potassium deficiency," she said matter-of-factly, "and your irrigation system is inefficient. I can fix both problems within a week using materials you likely already have. John and Abby exchanged looks. Well, Abby said with a hint of a smile, she's definitely not a horse. The first week with Elizabeth in the Miller household was strange for everyone. John set her up in the spare bedroom that had once belonged to his late wife's mother. The room was small but clean, with a window that looked out over the eastern fields. Elizabeth seemed pleased with it, placing her few belongings neatly in the old dresser. Abby remained cautious but curious. After the initial shock of learning that an alien was going to live with them, she bombarded Elizabeth with questions about space, her home planet, and how her species was different from humans. "Do you have special powers?" Abby asked one evening, as they sat at the kitchen table eating dinner. Elizabeth smiled. "Not the kind you see in movies. I can't fly or become invisible. My people's main difference is that we process oxygen more efficiently than humans. We can also see slightly more colors in the spectrum, and our night vision is better." "Is that why your skin is blue?" Abby asked. "Yes. Our blood contains copper instead of iron. When it binds with oxygen, it turns blue rather than red." John mostly kept quiet during these exchanges, still trying to process everything that had happened. The government paperwork he'd signed was locked in his desk drawer. Agent Clark had called twice to check on them, his tone professional but with an underlying note of caution that made John nervous. On the 8th day, Elizabeth asked to inspect the farm more thoroughly. John walked with her around the property, showing her the fields, the broken tractor, the small barn, and the irrigation system that never seemed to work right. "Your land has potential," Elizabeth said as they stood at the edge of a cornfield that was producing stalks half the height they should be. "The soil here has been depleted of key nutrients, but that can be fixed. And your water distribution is inefficient." John kicked at the dry soil. "I can't afford fancy fertilizers or a new irrigation system." Elizabeth knelt down and grabbed a handful of dirt, letting it sift through her fingers. "I don't need fancy equipment. On my world, we learn to farm with minimal resources. War and climate change destroyed much of our infrastructure. We had to adapt." She stood up. "Do you have a workshop? Basic tools?" John led her to the old shed where he kept his tools. Elizabeth spent hours there, examining everything. The next morning, she was up before dawn drawing detailed plans at the kitchen table. "What's all this?" John asked, pouring himself coffee. "I'm designing a new irrigation system using parts from your broken tractor and items I found in your workshop," she explained. "It will deliver water directly to the root systems rather than spraying it into the air where much of it evaporates." John looked skeptical, but gave her permission to try. Over the next 3 days, Elizabeth dismantled the old irrigation pipes and rebuilt them according to her design. John and Abby helped when she needed extra hands, but mostly they watched in amazement as she transformed junk into a sophisticated watering system. When she finished, she asked John to turn on the water. They stood together at the edge of the cornfield as water flowed through the new pipes. Instead of spraying up into the air, small tubes delivered water directly to the base of each plant. "This will reduce your water usage by 60% while increasing moisture delivery to the plants by 40%, Elizabeth said proudly. "That's amazing," John admitted. "But the soil is still poor." Elizabeth nodded. "For that, I need to visit the lake half a mile from here. There are certain algae and mineral deposits there that will help restore the soil." The improvements continued over the next 2 weeks. Elizabeth created natural fertilizers using materials gathered from around the farm and nearby natural areas. She showed John how to plant companion crops that would help restore nitrogen to the soil. She even fixed the old tractor using knowledge of engines that she claimed were similar to certain systems on her world. The farm began to transform. The corn grew taller, the vegetables in the garden doubled in size, and the fruit trees that hadn't produced in years began to show small buds. John found himself working alongside Elizabeth from sunrise to sunset, following her instructions and learning techniques he'd never heard of before. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, John finally asked the question that had been on his mind. "Why did your people come to Earth? There must be other planets out there." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, Her hand rested on her growing belly, a habit she'd developed. Earth is special, she finally said. Your planet is remarkably similar to Cerulean in atmosphere, gravity, and biology. When our scientists were searching for escape destinations, Earth was the obvious choice. She looked at him. And humans are physically very similar to us. We thought we could blend in. Except for the blue skin, John pointed out. Elizabeth smiled. A minor detail. With the right makeup, it's hardly noticeable. And the baby? John asked softly. Will it be blue too? The baby will be less blue than me. Each generation born on Earth will likely have less coloration. Eventually, our descendants will be indistinguishable from humans. The word descendants hung in the air between them. It implied a future, generations of her people living on Earth. Are there more of you coming? John asked. Elizabeth looked up at the darkening sky. I don't know. The war was going badly when we left. Our ship was small, just 12 of us escaped. Maybe others will follow if they can. Abby came out onto the porch, interrupting their conversation. Dad, there's a call for you. It's Agent Clark. John went inside to take the call. Agent Clark's voice was tense. Mr. Miller, we need to schedule a check-in visit tomorrow. There have been some developments. What kind of developments? John asked, suddenly worried. Nothing to concern yourself with, Agent Clark said in a tone that suggested the opposite. Just routine monitoring. We'll be there at noon. When John returned to the porch, he found Abby showing Elizabeth how to use her smartphone. Elizabeth was laughing at something on the screen, her blue-tinted face glowing in the light from the device. For a moment, she looked just like any other young woman, pregnant and happy, enjoying a simple pleasure. It struck John then how quickly he'd come to accept her presence in their home. In just 3 weeks, the alien woman had become part of their daily life, improving the farm, sharing meals, even joining their evening ritual of watching old movies on the small TV in the living room. Is everything okay? Elizabeth asked, noticing his expression. Agent Clark is coming tomorrow, John said. He says there are developments. Elizabeth's smile faded. She placed a protective hand over her belly. Did he say what kind? John shook his head. No, but I won't let them take you away if that's what they're planning. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Elizabeth. But he meant them. Whatever was coming tomorrow, John Miller wasn't going to let anyone disrupt the strange new life that was taking shape on his once failing farm. The next morning, John woke before sunrise. He couldn't sleep, worrying about Agent Clark's visit. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the papers he'd signed at the auction. There was nothing in them about taking Elizabeth away, but government agents rarely needed official permission for what they wanted to do. Elizabeth joined him at the table, her movements slower now that her pregnancy was more advanced. In the 4 weeks since she'd arrived, her belly had grown noticeably. You're worried, she said. It wasn't a question. John nodded. I don't trust government agents bringing developments. Elizabeth placed her hand over his. Her skin was cool, to the touch, another small difference between her species and humans. Whatever happens, I am grateful for what you've done for me. John looked at her hand on his. It was strange how normal her presence had become, blue skin and all. I came looking for a horse, he said with a small smile. I got something much better. Abby appeared in the doorway, yawning. Are we having a family meeting? She asked, pouring herself coffee. John noticed she'd included Elizabeth in the word family without hesitation. Agent Clark is coming at noon, John reminded her. We need to be prepared for anything. Abby sat down. You think they might take Elizabeth away? I don't know, but we need to be ready to argue our case if they try. John turned to Elizabeth. The farm is improving because of you. The new irrigation system alone has saved us enough water to lower our utility bill, and the soil treatments you've made are working miracles on the crops. We should document everything, Abby suggested, suddenly energetic. Take pictures of the fields before and after. Show the improvements to the tractor. Make it clear that Elizabeth is valuable here. They spent the morning gathering evidence of Elizabeth's contributions. Abby took photos of the healthier crops and made a chart showing the increased growth rates. John gathered receipts showing the reduced water usage. Elizabeth wrote down all the improvements she'd made and those she planned for the future. At 11:30, they heard vehicles approaching. John looked out the window and felt his stomach drop. 3 black SUVs were coming up the driveway, kicking up dust as they approached. "That's more than just Agent Clark," he said. The vehicles parked in front of the house and 6 men in black suits stepped out. Agent Clark was among them, along with another man whose suit looked more expensive and whose posture suggested higher authority. John went out to meet them, with Abby and Elizabeth staying inside as they'd agreed. "Mr. Miller," Agent Clark said, nodding in greeting. "This is Director Wilson from Washington. He oversees the Interstellar Refugee Program." Director Wilson did not offer to shake hands. "Where is the cerulean female?" he asked without preamble. "Her name is Elizabeth," John said firmly, "and she's inside. May I ask what this is about?" "We've detected a signal," Director Wilson said. "Coming from this area. Our satellites traced it to your farm." John felt cold. "A signal? What kind of signal?" "The kind that goes into deep space," Wilson said, his eyes hard. "The kind that could tell others where to find Earth." John's mind raced. Had Elizabeth been sending messages? Was she some kind of spy or advanced scout for an invasion? He didn't want to believe it. "I need to speak with her," he said. "We all do," Wilson replied. Now, inside, Elizabeth sat calmly at the kitchen table. She showed no surprise at the accusation. "Yes, I sent a signal," she admitted. 3 days ago." John felt as if he'd been punched. "Why? Were you calling for others to come?" Elizabeth looked hurt. "Not in the way you're thinking. I sent a message to tell any survivors from my world that Earth is safe, that humans have been kind." She looked at Director Wilson. "I used the communication device you gave me." Wilson frowned. "What device?" "The emergency beacon. Every refugee received one. Agent Clark told us to use it if we found safe placement." She turned to Agent Clark, who suddenly looked uncomfortable. "Never gave her any beacon," Clark said quickly. Director Wilson's gaze shifted between them. "Search the house," he ordered the other agents. "Find this device." As the agents spread through the house, John looked at Elizabeth. "Is this true? Did Agent Clark give you something?" Elizabeth nodded. "He said it was standard procedure, a small device to signal if the placement was successful or if I needed extraction." One of the agents returned holding a small metallic object, no bigger than a cell phone. "Found it in her room, sir. It's definitely not one of ours." Director Wilson took the device, examining it. "This is advanced technology." "Where did you get this, Clark?" Agent Clark's face had gone pale. "I never gave her anything like that." Elizabeth stood up, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. "He gave it to all 12 of us, said it was part of the program." Director Wilson nodded to 2 agents who moved to stand on either side of Clark. "Agent Clark, you're being detained. Pending investigation." "If you've compromised national security—" "I didn't," Clark protested. "I was approached by someone claiming to be from your office. They said the devices were approved." "And you didn't verify this?" Wilson asked coldly. As the agents led Clark outside, Wilson turned back to Elizabeth. "What exactly did you transmit in this signal?" "Coordinates for Earth. Information about humans being helpful. Data about your agriculture that might help my people survive." She looked at John. "And a request for peaceful contact only. I told them that humans are good but afraid of the unknown, that they should approach with care and respect." Wilson's expression was grim. "Do you realize what you've done? You've potentially exposed Earth to an interstellar civilization we know nothing about." "My people are peaceful," Elizabeth insisted. "We're scientists and farmers. The war that destroyed our world was with another species entirely. And what if they follow you here?" Wilson demanded. Elizabeth placed a protective hand on her belly. "They won't. The enemies who attacked us can't travel as far as Earth. That's why we came. Here. John stepped between Elizabeth and Wilson. She's helped us, improved our farm. She's not a threat. Wilson looked at the evidence they'd gathered. The photos of thriving crops, the improved irrigation system, the repaired tractor. Your farm does look better, he admitted. But that doesn't change the fact that she sent an unauthorized transmission into space. What happens now? John asked. Normally, I'd take her to a secure facility for questioning. Wilson glanced at Elizabeth's pregnant belly. But given her condition and the fact that Agent Clark may have been compromised, I need to reconsider our protocols. He turned to Elizabeth. Can you modify this device to receive messages as well as send them? Elizabeth nodded. Yes, with the right tools. Then here's what's going to happen, Wilson said. You'll stay here under Mr. Miller's supervision. You'll help us monitor for any response to your signal. If your people are as peaceful as you claim, this could be a historic opportunity for both our species. John felt relief wash over him. So she can stay? For now, Wilson said, but we'll be watching more closely. And Mr. Miller? Yes? If anything unusual happens, anything at all, you call us immediately. Wilson handed John a new card with a direct number. After the agents left, taking Agent Clark with them, John, Abby, and Elizabeth sat in silence around the kitchen table. I'm sorry, Elizabeth finally said. I should have told you about the device. Why, didn't you? John asked. I was afraid. Agent Clark said it was only for emergencies, but I wanted my people to know I was safe. She looked at John with worried eyes. Are you angry with me? John thought about it. He should be angry. She had, potentially put them all at risk. But looking at her now, he couldn't summon the feeling. No, he said. I understand wanting to reach out to your people, to let them know you're okay. Abby smiled. Besides, if more of your people come, maybe they can help other farms too. Imagine what that could mean for places with food shortages. Elizabeth's expression brightened. That was my hope, that humans and ceruleans could help each other. John nodded slowly. I guess we'll find out if anyone heard your message. 2 months passed without any response to Elizabeth's signal. Summer turned to early fall and the farm flourished under her care. The corn stood tall and healthy, the vegetable garden produced more than John and Abby could eat, and the fruit trees were heavy with apples and pears. John even had enough extra produce to sell at the local farmers market, bringing in money they desperately needed with Abby's college expenses looming. Elizabeth's pregnancy progressed normally, her belly now large and round. Dr. Susan Kelly, a government doctor sent by Director Wilson, visited once a week to check on her. The baby was developing well, though the ultrasound showed subtle differences in organ placement compared to human babies. The lungs are more developed than a human fetus at this stage, Dr. Kelly explained during one visit, and the heart has an extra chamber, though it's smaller than the others. Elizabeth nodded. Cerulean babies develop their respiratory systems early. It helps them survive if born premature. As her due date approached, John prepared the small bedroom next to Elizabeth's as a nursery. He found his late wife's old crib in the attic and cleaned it up. Abby painted the walls a soft green color and made curtains from fabric she found in town. Do you know if it's a boy or a girl? Abby asked one evening as they worked on the nursery. Elizabeth smiled. A girl. On my world, we don't make much distinction between genders, but I know it matters more here on Earth. Have you thought of a name? John asked, assembling a small bookshelf. I was thinking of Hope, Elizabeth said. It seems appropriate. Life settled into a comfortable routine. Elizabeth continued to improve the farm, though she worked fewer hours as her pregnancy advanced. John found himself spending evenings with her on the porch, watching the sun set and talking about their different worlds. Sometimes their hands would touch, and neither would pull away. Abby noticed the growing closeness between them and seemed pleased. You two look good together, she told her father one day when Elizabeth was resting. It's not like that, John, protested weakly. Abby raised an eyebrow. Dad, I've seen how you look at her, and how she looks at you. John couldn't deny that something was changing between him and Elizabeth. She wasn't Mary, and he didn't try to compare them. But there was a connection, a mutual respect and caring that was growing stronger each day. One night, as they sat together after Abby had gone to bed, Elizabeth took John's hand deliberately. "On my world," she said softly, "when two people find comfort in each other during difficult times, it is seen as a gift from the universe." John looked at their joined hands. "On Earth too," he said. They might have said more, but at that moment Elizabeth's communication device began to beep from inside the house. They rushed to retrieve it from the drawer where they kept it. The small screen on the device glowed with symbols John couldn't read, but Elizabeth's face lit up with joy. "It's from my people," she said, her voice trembling. "A ship survived. They received my message and they're coming." John felt a mix of emotions, happiness for Elizabeth, but also fear of what this might mean. "How many? When will they arrive?" Elizabeth studied the message. "A small ship, perhaps 20 people. They'll arrive in approximately 3 weeks. She looked up at John, her eyes shining. "They're scientists, farmers, teachers, refugees like me looking for a safe home." John nodded slowly. "We should call Director Wilson." The next day, Wilson arrived with a team of agents and scientists. They set up monitoring equipment in the barn and debriefed Elizabeth thoroughly about the message. "If they're peaceful as you claim, this could be the beginning of a beneficial relationship between our peoples," Wilson said. "But we need to be cautious. They're coming here because they trust my assessment that humans are kind," Elizabeth reminded him. "Please don't greet them with weapons and fear." Wilson didn't make any promises, but he did agree to consider a peaceful reception depending on further communications. As the agents worked in the barn, Elizabeth suddenly gasped and grabbed her belly. "What's wrong?" John asked, alarmed. "The baby," Elizabeth said. "I think it's coming." Dr. Kelly, who was on site with Wilson's team, quickly examined Elizabeth. "She's in labor. We need to get her to the medical facility we've prepared." "No," Elizabeth said firmly, gripping John's hand. "I want to have my baby here in my home." John felt a surge of emotion at hearing Elizabeth call the farm her home. "Can we do that safely?" he asked Dr. Kelly. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "I have equipment in my car. If the labor progresses normally, we can deliver here. But if there are complications, we'll need to move her." The next 12 hours were intense. Elizabeth's labor progressed faster than a human birth would, but there were no complications. Abby stayed by her side, holding her hand and speaking words of encouragement. John paced nervously, feeling helpless but determined to be there for Elizabeth. Just as dawn broke, with the first rays of sun streaming through the bedroom window, Elizabeth gave birth to a baby girl. The child's cry was strong and clear, her tiny body perfect in every way. Her skin had only the faintest blue tint, visible mainly behind her ears and along her hairline. Dr. Kelly cleaned and examined the baby, then placed her in Elizabeth's arms. "She's healthy. All vital signs are strong." Elizabeth looked down at her daughter with tears in her eyes. "Hope," she whispered. John stood beside the bed, overwhelmed by the moment. Abby joined him, and they looked at the tiny baby who represented so much. The first cerulean child born on Earth, a new beginning for Elizabeth's people, and somehow, a new beginning for their family too. 2 weeks later, as hope grew stronger, each day they received another message from the approaching cerulean ship. They would arrive in 7 days, landing in a remote area designated by the government. Director Wilson came to the farm again, this time with a different kind of paperwork. "We need to establish Elizabeth's legal status before her people arrive," he explained. "As the mother of a child born on American soil, she has certain rights, but her situation is unique." He placed the papers on the kitchen table. "These documents will grant Elizabeth permanent resident status under your sponsorship, Mr. Miller." John looked at the papers. "What kind of sponsorship?" Wilson cleared his throat. "Given the unusual circumstances, We've determined that the most straightforward approach would be marriage. It would automatically confer legal protections to both Elizabeth and Hope. John and Elizabeth looked at each other in surprise. It would be a legal arrangement only, Wilson added quickly, for immigration purposes. After Wilson left, John and Elizabeth sat on the porch swing, baby Hope sleeping peacefully in Elizabeth's arms. We don't have to do this, John said. There might be other ways. Elizabeth looked at him. On my world, marriage is a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. It doesn't require what humans call romantic love, though that can develop over time. On Earth it's similar for some people, John said, though we often expect love to come first. Elizabeth smiled. We already have respect and friendship. We share a home and care for this child together. Perhaps that is enough to begin with. John looked at Hope, her tiny face peaceful in sleep. Then he looked at Elizabeth, her blue-tinged skin now so familiar to him that he hardly noticed it anymore. I came to buy a horse, he said with a smile. Instead, I found a family. The next day, John Miller and Elizabeth were married in a simple ceremony at the county courthouse with Abby and baby Hope as their only witnesses. As they signed the marriage certificate, Elizabeth's communication device beeped again from her pocket. The message was brief. The cerulean ship had accelerated and would arrive tomorrow. The next chapter in their unusual story was about to begin, with more of Elizabeth's people coming to a world that was still learning to accept them. As they drove back to the farm, John looked at his new wife holding their daughter and felt a sense of peace he hadn't known since Mary died. Sometimes the universe had strange ways of bringing people together, even when those people came from different worlds.